Hey everybody, this is Matthew Seville with SLRlounge.com, and today I have a few quick tips for you on how to shoot slow, I'm talking very slow shutter speeds for portraits and stuff like that. I have a background in landscape photography. That's what got me into photography in the first place, so I'm very used to shooting at very slow shutter speeds. But then when I started picking up portraiture, I realized I wanted to get back to that, and I didn't want to lose the ability to shoot at slower shutter speeds. So here we have a 3-second photo at f11 ISO 800. Basically, I wanted everything to be sharp. I wanted lots of depth of field, and I wanted motion blur in the waves. I just wanted that very beautiful, soft, ethereal look. And so that's how I arrived at these camera settings. And surprisingly enough, if I zoom in, even though it's a 3-second exposure, you can still see that they are holding pretty darn still here. I had to do a little bit of noise reduction and everything to kind of clean it up, but overall this is just really looking good as far as shutter speeds and motion blur are concerned. Anyways, you can check out another image here. It's 1.5 seconds. And it's a lot easier to get sharpness at 1.5 seconds. You can see they're holding pretty still. I've got a little bit of noise reduction and sharpening issues, but for the most part, they're pretty tack sharp. There's one more image over here. You can see this one. This is a half a second exposure, and you can see if I zoom back in here, they are just tack sharp by this point. There's no shake whatsoever. So how do you hold still? How do you get these sharp exposures at half a second when I'm shooting portraits and stuff like this? Well, of course, the number one rule is, and this is a no-brainer, get a tripod. Use a tripod. Of course, I'm shooting at half a second, so a tripod is absolutely necessary, but even if you're at like 60th of a second or a 30th of a second, and you think you can hand hold it, maybe you've got a stabilized lens, but the bottom line is your keeper rate will go up if you use a tripod. So what I hate is I'm hand holding and I'm just barely cutting it, and I get that one perfect pose where their smiles are perfect, or whatever else, it's perfect, and then I go to zoom in and oh, that was the one shot where I just kind of slightly fudged on the hand holding, and it's just kind of weird, or it's just barely unusable. So that's why whenever I get down past about a 60th of a second, I just start using a tripod no matter what. It just gives me a much better keeper rate. And of course, overall sharpness is just great. For this particular image here, you can see I wanted to go to f11 because I really wanted this to be all nice and sharp. Of course, if I had a 24mm f1.4 lens, I could have totally handheld this, no problem. F11 to f1.4, maybe bump the ISO up or down. I would have been at a usable shutter speed real quick. But I wanted f11 because I wanted all of this to be as sharp as possible, and I wanted a little bit of still motion in the reflection here and everything. So that's why I decided to go for a 0.5 second exposure. So that's the reason behind that. But either way, even if you're at a half a second, or if you're at an eighth of a second or a tenth of a second, maybe you don't mind, you just shoot wide open at f2.8 or f1.4 or something, you're still going to be better off if you have a tripod and if you shoot in a very stable manner overall. The next tip is, if you're on a tripod, you have access to, timer delay mode, which will give you a 2-second timer delay, and that allows you to take your hands, your shaky little hands, if you've just had a bunch of cups of coffee, get your shaky little hands off that tripod, off that camera, let the camera sit for 2 seconds before the shutter opens and everything, and that will give you a lot more stability as well. So that's another thing. On Nikon cameras, though, you also have an option for very quick access mirror lockup sort of thing, where it's called exposure delay mode on some of the Nikons. I believe you can dig through the menus and find it. It's basically going to separate the mirror and the shutter motion. So what happens is you click the shutter button on your camera, but the shutter doesn't go up right away, just the mirror goes up. And then after a half a second or 1 or 2 seconds, the shutter itself will click. So what that does is it removes the mirror motion, which can cause a little bit of shake. It removes that from the equation as well. So if I'm shooting landscapes hardcore, for example, and I'm getting really into it, then what I'll be doing is I will put a 2-second timer on, and I'll put my exposure delay mode on. So it kind of delays your quick timing if you want to get a wave crashing or something. It's kind of annoying. Maybe you want a kibble release for that instead. But if you don't have to time the shot perfectly, you can do timer delay and do an exposure delay to separate the mirror so you have the sharpest possible photos. And moving right along, the next tip I have for you is you can see this photo right here and also this photo here at the end. Let me filter to green so I can see all those. These photos were taken with my tripod on sand. Of course, this photo, there's nothing I could do. There wasn't any rocks for quite a ways. But what I did was I made sure that I was on dry, solid sand. If I were down here, my tripod would sink into the sand slowly, especially if a wave came up even close to it. So that's one thing to avoid. In this particular image, I was able to find some rocks over here as well as over here. So what I did was I spread the tripod really, really wide so that 2 of the legs came over in this direction and 1 of them came over in this direction, so that I was actually on very, very, very solid ground, even though I was lowering the tripod very close to this little sand bank right here. So anyways, that's just another little quick tip for getting overall stability when you're using a tripod. And last but definitely not least, it's the general posing technique and everything that has to keep your couple or your subject stable. What I like to do a lot of the time is give my couples a pose that helps them stabilize themselves. Holding each other is very good for this. You know, they're kind of wrapped around each other, they're stabilizing each other. Their heads, like in this photo, their heads are they're almost touching or just barely touching at the forehead. So all of their body parts, their arms, their heads are stabilized. And another thing you can have them do is you can kind of have them stick a foot out to kind of get a little bit more of a broad stance. That'll help for staying stable very, very much. And what I want to do is I want them to stick a foot out in this direction for him, or let me see if I can find this other photo. For example, also in this direction here, in this photo, she's got her foot out, so they're kind of laterally stabilized, so they're not going to be swaying from side to side in this direction. That's what would create the most blur and just ruin the shot quickly. If they sway forward towards me, that's a lot less of a concern because they could sway back and forth by an inch or so and still be, you know, pixel for pixel, still be pretty perfect here. So that's one thing is I have them set their feet out, at least one of them set a foot out to kind of laterally stabilize yourself so that the motion in this direction is minimized because that's the greatest source of motion. Anyways, guys, that's about it. There aren't very many other tips other than to shoot a lot of photos, of course, and also what I have a habit of doing is I just call it out to them. I'll just yell, hold still, hold still, hold still, hold still, keep holding still until my shutter is over. I'll give them a fair warning right before the shutter's about to open. I'll say, okay, get ready, start holding still, and then wait, 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 and we're done. Just do that. And so they know exactly when they need to hold still, so they can kind of wiggle a little bit if they need to before or after each click. And honestly, for these types of shots, if I'm at 3 seconds, I'm going to be having them hold still for 5 or 6 shots at least, just to get one in focus, perfectly sharp one. Anyways, as a general rule, 3 seconds is pretty much past the limit of what I like to do. 1.5 seconds or 1 second or a half second, you can usually get almost any subject to hold perfectly still. Even if your couple is got tons of coffee in them or if they're just fidgety in general, a half a second is pretty much good to go if you use all of these techniques. Maybe 1 second or 1.5 or 2 seconds, you can get some sharpness out of them at that point. But they gotta be practiced. It helps if they're warm and not shivering on a cold day like this. But overall, try for about a half a second or a 1 second exposure for starters, and then delve into the 2 or 3 or 4 second exposures if you if you're really confident in the abilities. Anyways, that's about it for now, guys, and thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you in our next tutorial. All right, take care.